Welcome and thanks for joining. Most times when people communicate what they say, they mean, and what they mean, they say. Yet many times, if it's 5 or 15 or 20, I don't know, depending on what type of person, what family, there's many times that we need to read between the lines, because what people say they don't mean, and what they mean they do not say. We're not even talking about passive aggressiveness right now. We're talking about simply not understanding ourselves and not being taught of how to communicate or express sometimes the paradox that we live and we experience. Here's a big one. Why is there no food in the house? Can you imagine your mother, you just spent $500 on shopping, your fridge is full, your freezer is full, your pantry is full. And typically it usually happens with teenagers, and they come into the kitchen and you see them open up the fridge door and they look through one shelf, the second shelf, they open up the drawers, they look at the door, and you could sense the frustration. They slam the door, then they open up the freezer, and then they look through the freezer, they pick something up, they put it in their hands, and they put it back, and then they put something else in their hands, they put it back. And then they go to the pantry, they open up one cabinet, they open up the next door, and they open up the third door, and they open up the fourth door. And finally, it's something that all parents do not want to hear, or sometimes lovers, friends, don't want to hear. And this is what they say: there is nothing to eat in the house. There's nothing to eat in the house. They don't say it. They're actually very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Passionate. They're very passionate about it. Like, how could there be no food? The typical response, because we think that people say what they mean and mean what they say. What do you mean there's no food in the house? Here, some parents actually run up to the fridge and they actually pick up the apple, the orange, the quiche, the meat, the chicken, the schnitzel, the rice, and you name it. I'm not going to go through the whole fridge. They go through the freezer, they go through the pantry. What do you mean? And usually the one that you're talking to, typically there's a good chance they will storm out of the room and respond, "You just don't get it, that's not true, you hate me," like all weird things, and we just think our child or our lover is nuts. Now let me share with you a very, very different perspective. For if there's anything that's shocking, anything that's confusing, anything that's weird on planet Earth, is us human beings. We're taught 80% of stuff in school that we will never use, that's not practical, it's a waste of time. We're using the curriculum of 200-300 years ago. And we are not taught the 80% that's imperative for relationships and for all of us to use on a daily basis. And what I'm going to share with you now is something pretty simple, a little bit concealed, a little bit abstract, but once I explain to you how the system works, you will then understand and have a very different appreciation for your teen or for your spouse, for your lover, for your friend that lives with you. Whoever that person is that's always, not always, but from time to time walk into the kitchen and come up with exact same speech: there is nothing to eat. And hear it how it works. There's various parts of the brain that will do various functions for humans, okay? And there's a part of the brain that will give us a signal when we are hungry. And then we know when we are hungry. Sadly, when we are stressed or in various stressful situations in our life, that part of the brain just doesn't function properly. The hypothalamus will not give us that instruction. We're lying in bed in our bedroom, hours have passed. The amygdala comes and knocks at our door. That's the part of the brain that's, I call, the bookkeeper. And that bookkeeper keeps track of the trillions of moments of functions since the second you were born, almost probably before you were born. Besides that, it has so many more functions. One of the functions it does, it keeps track. And it starts whispering in your ear and says, "Why don't you go downstairs? Why don't you go into the kitchen and grab something to eat?" And the amygdala goes into details of what you felt like when you had the pizza and how the cheese just drooled down your cheeks and how you loved it. The hypothalamus goes and says, leave me alone, I'm out of order, don't talk to me now. And if that's not confusing enough, then the prefrontal cortex that's in charge of making the decision, the manager's operation, comes to you and says, yeah, it's an important thing. I mean, you haven't eaten already a whole entire day. I'm not going to talk about you skipping showering for the last 3 days, but you haven't eaten. Go downstairs. Reluctantly, you go down and you're hoping some miracle happens when you enter into the kitchen. And as you walk in, you look at every type of food possibly that your hands could get a grip on, and you go, nah, and you go, yeah, and you go, nah. These are the various parts of the brain that's giving you contrary signals. Now, what we weren't taught in school or by our parents, because our parents don't know this themselves, is this is what your child, your teenager, or your spouse, or your lover is saying. There is nothing in the house for me to eat that let's insert the most important part, that I have an appetite for. And a part of me is actually hungry. Let me say it one more time. There's nothing in this house, despite that the pantry, the fridge, and the freezer is full. There's nothing here right now that I actually have an appetite. And a part of me does want to eat. I want to eat. I didn't eat for so long, and life is so hard. And I had a few friends that abandoned me, and I'm not ready for the test. And I don't know if I'm coming, and I don't know if I'm going, and I don't even know why I'm sad, and now I can't even eat. The individual that says there's nothing to eat in the house, we look at them like they're crazy. It happens to be, yeah, based on what they're saying, you might come to a judgment that they're crazy. But what they're really saying, the moment the human being says there's nothing to eat, it's revealing to you there's a whole list of other issues as well, besides them not having an appetite, but yet do want to eat. It's very similar to someone that's physically sick and they're vomiting and they have the flu, and we understand because they're physically sick, and they walk into the kitchen and go, oh, I wish I could eat, I wish I could eat, and we go, yeah, I know, maybe some tea and some toast, nah, yeah, no, and it goes back and forth. Here the person doesn't look physically sick, but they're emotionally challenged due to the deep stress that they're going through, and that's why it happens most with teenagers or with children that in the first place are very picky eaters. They will say there is nothing to eat. So now that you have this information, we can love. We don't need to judge. We can love. The way to respond is very, very difficult because every human being is different. But I'm going to give you some ideas, and you're going to get to know the human being that you live with. Some of them will explode in your face, and some of them might be extremely warm and very beautiful. And I would try one by one each time that the child, the teenager, has a tough time, or the one I'm living with, and see which one works with them. There's no right and wrong. One of them would be simple. After they have their tantrum that there's nothing to eat, and now you understand what that really means, I would say, you know what? It's so hard when you haven't eaten for hours and there's nothing that talks to you. Or because they're stressed out, they might say, shut up, or they might slam the door and leave the room. In 5-10 years, they're going to thank you for what you said. But right now, they cannot think straight. And they don't mean to be disrespectful to you. This has nothing to do with you, and get your issues out of the whole entire equation. This is only about them. Or the child, if you do have a good relationship on a regular basis, might look at you and they might actually walk over to you, just give you a big hug and say nothing. Or they might say, yeah, I want to eat and I don't have an appetite. And they go, yeah, I know, it's so hard. That happened to me other times too, where there's so much in front of you, but there's nothing to eat. And this phrase is extremely important because you repeated their words. There's so much in front of you, yet there's nothing to eat. That will touch a certain nerve because you get me. Let me say it one more time. There's so much in front of me, and there's nothing to eat, and there's nothing we can really do. Sometimes it's the ice cream, it's the chips, it's the cookies, it's everything. We always have appetite, and today we don't. The other thing we could try, sometimes this worked by me, where I tried and I told my child, and there was a 90% chance there would be no, but I still tried because it's okay for the 10% or even 1%. And it's all about compassion. It's not about suggestion. Right now, that individual is in emotional turmoil. Let's not come with the accountant and the prefrontal cortex with all our logic and tangible reality, because right now we are in emotional turmoil. So therefore, it's okay if the child will slam and say no. At least offer it, not offer from a practical point of view, but from an emotional point of view. How would you like if I fry for you an egg with some cheese or the stuff that you like? How would that work? Sometimes they would say yes, sometimes they would say no, and even when they said yes, they couldn't eat afterwards. But I understood, because they thought, yeah, if he's gonna do A, B, and C, and this person, this dad, this father is gonna work on it, maybe their appetite miraculously might happen. But even then, it didn't happen. They apologized, and I said, no apologies are needed. I understand that one of my favorite slogans are, and I repeat this almost on a daily basis in texts and emails, verbally, I live in this world as well. Let me say it one more time. I live in this world as well. I know what it means sometimes not to have an appetite. What I hope, and what I pray, and what I cry, and what I plead, that very soon, the stuff that we knew hundreds of years will begin to be taught in schools, even in grade 1 and 2 and 3, of how to understand and to relate each other. Emotional pain, physical fights, divorces, breakups, wars will cease to exist, for depth, understanding, connecting, love will prevail versus ignorant judgment that happens behind our back all too often. Thanks for listening, and know, if you have the principle in front of your eyes that humans are intrinsically good, whenever you see a child, a spouse, a lover, anyone that acts in a way that you think, that I think, that is absurd, it's better to find out and to investigate of what's really going on. When the human being says there is nothing what to eat, they are not talking literal. They are talking about feelings. I feel there's nothing to eat because I have no appetite. Thanks for listening, and have yourself a glorious, amazing, and outstanding day, week, month, and year, and life.